turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Read the first 5 verses. Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord, and unto us by the will of God. In chapters 8 and 9, Paul is addressing the church at Corinth concerning a collection for the saints at Jerusalem. And he sets forth the churches of Macedonia as an example, speaking of the fact in verse 2 that in spite of their great trial of affliction and their deep poverty, they had abundance of joy, and they possessed liberality, that is, a generous and bountiful spirit. In verse 3, how they were able to go beyond themselves. Their affliction and their deep poverty did not get in the way of them doing the Lord's work. Their affliction and deep poverty were not used as an excuse or a reason to lessen their role in the work of the Lord. Their affliction and deep poverty were not the focus. The reason they were able to rise above their affliction and deep poverty is seen in 2 significant matters concerning them. Verse 3, they were willing of themselves. And verse 5, first gave their own selves to the Lord. Now, to encourage the Corinthian church to take part in this collection for the saints of Jerusalem, Paul closes in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 15, thanks be unto God for His unspeakable gift. So that was used as a motivational phrase. What God has done in our behalf should be a motivational force in our life that has an effect upon our entire being. I want to develop the thought of the message around 2 phrases, verses 3 and 5. They were willing of themselves and first gave their own selves to the Lord. Notice themselves and their own selves. So it is an interest that goes beyond self. It is investing beyond self. And notice also the words, verse 5, first to the Lord. So our subject is, what is our invested interest in God? We saw this morning God's invested interest in us. He gave His own Son. In the light of who God is, in the light of who we are, God's invested interest in us is a matter beyond description. God's interest in us. Romans 3, verses 9 through 12. There are 7 indictments brought against man, brought against each one of us individually. We read there that we are all under sin. That is, all in bondage and under the dominion of sin. Secondly, none righteous, none blameless with respect to God. Thirdly, none that understandeth. There's no understanding of sin, no understanding of our sinful nature, no understanding of the wrath of God that is due our sin, no understanding of God's way of salvation. As a result, fourthly, none that seeketh after God. That is, by nature we did not know God, and we did not seek to promote His glory. Fifthly, they're all gone out of the way. That is, God's way. They have all turned their backs and have gone in the opposite direction of God. Sixthly, having done this, they are altogether become unprofitable, vile and foul. And lastly, there is none that doeth good. None that performs goodness that is acceptable and satisfying to God. None of us know how wrong, how bad, how corrupt, how vile, how reprehensible, how abominable, how despicable, how offensive, how disgraceful we were, or we are, by nature. We do not comprehend, nor do we fully understand our degree of ruin, nor how spiritually disabled we truly were. We do not comprehend how fallen we were. It's a good question for those of Arminian theology. How far did man fall? None of us can comprehend how fallen we were. Nor can we comprehend the depths of our unrighteousness, the depths of our wickedness. We do not comprehend the depths of our alienation and estrangement from God, nor the depths of the darkness and the enmity that we're in, nor the depths of our spiritual bankruptcy and condemnation. We do not fully comprehend the spiritual grave that we were in, nor the weight of sin that we were under, nor do we fully grasp how deserving we are of God's wrath, and how undeserving we are of His love. The fact that holy, perfectly righteous, pure, and perfectly good and just God, who hates sin, that He loves us, is beyond our comprehension. It's Ephesians 2 verse 4. But God, who is rich in mercy for His great love wherewith He loved us, even when we were dead in sins. It is a love without comparison. There's no love that you can compare to this. It's an immeasurable love. It cannot be measured. It's extraordinary. It's unique. It's higher than all others. It's superior to all others. God had a loving interest in me. That's amazing. It is not merely that He provides for me, not merely that He cares for me and thinks upon me and watches over me, and He does all those things, but He loves me, who was shapen in iniquity. He loves us who were depraved and deceitful and filthy and vile. He loves us who rose up against Him as an enemy, not just once, time and time again, and still do. He loved us who was under the debilitating control of sin, and in the ignorance and the blindness of sin. And we wallowed in the pollution of sin. And this is an individual, distinct, particular. It is a selective, perpetual, undying, timeless, loving interest in you and I that are saved. A loving interest that purposed our salvation, causing God not to withhold His own Son, but rather deliver Him up for us, to take our sins, to be made a curse, and to endure God's righteous wrath against our sin. A loving interest in me. A loving interest that reaches deeper than the filth and sickness of sin. You and I can take interest in something and we can lose interest in that very thing. God's interest reaches deeper than the filth and sickness of our sin, reaches deeper than all that is wrong with us, all that is displeasing in us. It is an interest that reaches deeper than the control of sin, the darkness of sin, the ignorance of sin, the blindness of sin. Reaches deeper than our enmity against God, reaches deeper than our rebellion against God. It is a loving interest that reaches deeper than our irreverence and our rejection, our turning away from God, deeper than our covetousness, deeper than our selfishness, deeper than our hardness, deeper than our unbelief. It is a loving interest in you and I that reaches deeper than the stain and the shame of sin, reaches deeper than the bondage of sin, reaches deeper than the guilt of sin. It's an interest in us individually, an interest in our salvation. Again, as we brought the message this morning, Romans 8:32, God spared not His own Son, but delivered Him up for us. That is a declaration of His measureless, unconquerable love for us. God spared not His own Son, but delivered Him up for us. A declaration that in spite of who and what we are, a declaration of God's invested interest in you and I. It is a declaration of the cost of His willing investment, His own Son. It is God actively engaged for us. The magnitude of this is a great marvel. It's mind-boggling. It's beyond amazing. And the greater our grasp of the depths of our depravity, the more amazing His grace becomes to us. So let's consider, in light of God's invested interest in us, our invested interest in God. God gave Christ for you and I, individually. God spared not His own Son, but delivered Him, His own Son, up for us. His own Son for me. No greater gift has ever been given. No example of generosity is so selfless as what God has given us. God for me. God spared not His own Son. As a result, Jesus left heaven and the glory that He had there to take upon Himself human flesh, and that was for me. It signifies God's immense love. It signifies His interest in us. The question is, what is the level of our interest in God? Interest is attention engaged. That's a definition of interest. Attention engaged. It is a drawing attention. Interest draws us to whatever it is we're interested in. Interest is a level of occupation, a level of activity, a level of being engaged in whatever it is we're interested. There are varying levels of interest. There's such a thing as no interest. There are things that have absolutely no interest in. None. Zilch. No interest whatsoever. There's minimal interest. Things that we're a little curious about. There's curiosity. There's distracted interest. An interest that is easily diverted by other interests. We all have many interests. There are many things that interest us. Some of them are easily diverted because our interest isn't that deep. It's easily diverted. In other words, it's not the main or chief interest. Then there's such a thing as consuming interest. It's an engrossing interest. It's what our attention is continually drawn to. What we find ourselves thinking about in the midst of everything else. It's an interest that finds a way. It finds a way. And is willing to lay aside whatever needs to be laid aside to take part in that interest. It's, in other words, it's an interest of top priority. It's first interest. So what is the level of our interest in God and in the matters of God? What is our interest? What is our level of interest in the spiritual? These are questions that need to be considered. And they need to be considered in the light of God's unspeakable gift. In the light of God spared not His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all. I don't think it can be said of anyone here that we have no interest in God. Wouldn't be here if that was the case. I do believe there are those in churches that have minimal interest in God, minimal interest in the things of God. There are those who have a curiosity. Many times visitors, I'm not saying every visitor, but many times visitors will come because they're curious. It's a curiosity. It's an interest. I believe most of God's people would fall under what we called distracted interest. They have an interest in God. They have an interest in spiritual matters. But it's quite a stretch to say it's the main one, because it's easily distracted. If it's easily distracted, it's not the main interest. And again, if it's the main interest, you will find a way. You'll find a way. People do what they want to do. That's really what it boils down to. People will find a way to do what they want to do. No matter how inconvenient it is, they will find a way. That should be our interest in God. Again, the subject is invested interest. Investment is more than a contribution. Investment is a commitment. There are those who are willing to contribute spiritually to a degree, but that's different than a commitment. Investment is linked to willingness. And we read in verse 3, they were willing. They were willing. Investment is a willingness to let go. You're willing to let go of something. What is our level of investment with God? What are we willing to let go? There's only one right answer to that, and that's everything. And are any of us willing to let go of everything? That's something to ponder. We read verse 5, that they gave. That's investment. They were willing to let go. They gave. Now, if you were to sit down with a financial planner and you want to talk about investing money, what do they want to know? They want to know what your plans are. What are your goals? That's a good place to start. With our interest, our investment, our invested interest in God. What are our plans concerning God? What is our goal concerning God? They will ask, well, what do you have to invest? What are you willing to invest? What are you comfortable with? What are you comfortable with investing? Again, what you have to invest and what you're comfortable with investing, two different things. They want to know your level of risk. What are you willing to risk? And those are all good questions, so they can properly plan your financial future. But turn all that around to God. What do we have to invest? The answer is everything that God has given us. That's what we have to invest. What are you comfortable with investing? Now you got a different answer. Because you're lying if you say, well, I'm willing to invest everything that God's given me. I don't think so. I doubt it seriously. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we comfortable with investing in God? What is our level of interest? So our level of interest and our willingness to invest in that interest, they're linked. The question is, what and how much are we willing to invest in God and in the matters of God? What amount are we comfortable investing with God and the matters of God? God often rebuked His people for their oblivion and their indifference toward Himself. In other words, they lost interest in God. They lost interest in spiritual things. And due to our sinful nature, we are dangerously prone to that very thing. God willingly, freely, without any reluctance, gave His own Son for us. As a result, here we are, spared and richly blessed. But the question is, how invested are we with regard to God? Paul said of the churches of Macedonia, they were willing of themselves. They were willing of themselves. There was no reluctance. They were willing of themselves. Again, how willing are we toward God? In the light of God gave His own Son, how willing are we? You can ask in a different way. What is our reluctance toward God? It's amazing. God has never once let me down. God has never once proved unfaithful. Not once. Not a single time. And yet, by nature, we are reluctant to trust Him. We are more prone to trust that which is unfaithful and which will fail. But we read in Nehemiah 11 verse 2, we read of those who willingly offered themselves. And here in our text, verse 3, they were willing of themselves. Willing to give themselves. They did not withhold themselves. How much of ourselves do we withhold in the service of God? But these were willing to go beyond self. They were willing of themselves. In other words, they were more interested in God than they were themselves. No self-seeking, no self-importance, simply willing of themselves. It conveys the idea that they were voluntarily, they were decisively, they were readily, and they were cheerfully committed to God. Self is what God requires. That's what He requires. And they were willing of themselves. In other words, they were all in. And in verse 5, they gave their own selves to the Lord. It is willing to give their all to the Lord. Desirous to give themselves to the Lord. This is what is required. We are to present ourselves to God. They voluntarily, decisively, readily, cheerfully handed over themselves to the Lord. They let go. And they relinquished all claim upon their lives. It is a yielding of the totality of our being. A resignation of our being to God. That is to be our invested interest. It doesn't come naturally to us. It's something we need God's help in. It is a sacrifice to God in life without any complaint. All this requires an invested interest in the Lord. Again, they gave their own selves to the Lord. So invested with the Lord that there is nothing off limits. Nothing off limits. Nothing excluded from Him. It's a life of surrender. It's a life of commitment. Again, there are those who are willing to contribute every now and then. That's not what it's about. It's a life of commitment. It's a life of devotion. It's allegiance and dedication to God. Willing of themselves, gave their own selves to the Lord. A people so invested that they are drawn and compelled to present themselves without apprehension, without hesitation. Oh, to serve God without any apprehension, without any hesitation, to serve Him. It is not merely, verse 5, that they gave their own selves to the Lord, but it's first. First, gave themselves to the Lord. That's before everything else. That's not waiting to see what happens and then we'll decide. It's first. It's first. Before anything else. An invested interest that puts Him first. You realize if God's people put Him first, the house of God would be full wherever they meet. It'd be full. The people's interests are diverted. First, before all other plans. Well, you got to understand, I've had this plan a long time. I do understand. He's not first. Your plans are first. 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 Before all other desires. Well, I've wanted this for a long time. First. Before all other ways. Before all other pursuits. First. It's not that we can't have plans. It's not that we can't have other desires and ways and pursuits. It's what's first. First. They first gave their own selves to the Lord. So interested, so invested, that He's first. Our degree of interest establishes our level of investment. And it is our invested interest that establishes priority. Again, we've used it many times. Luke chapter 9, verse 23 and 24, verse 57 through 62. Lord, let me first, and then I will. They had an interest in the Lord. No one can say they didn't have any interest. They had an interest in the Lord. They had an interest in the matters of the Lord. But they were willing to put Him and His interest aside for other matters. And that's where most of God's people are. They have an interest. They have an interest. But they're also very willing to put those interests to the side. Again, we've read this many times. I love it. It's like the young man who wrote the poem to his girlfriend. He said, I would climb the highest mountain, swim the deepest ocean too. I would crawl the hottest desert. I would do anything for you. I would leap the tallest building. I'd bear any trial or pain. There's no limit to my love. And I'll be over Friday night if it doesn't rain. How true. How true. Oh, I'm willing to go all the way. If it don't rain. And then whatever else. We need to have such an invested interest in the Lord, in the matters of the Lord, that He is our aspiration, He is our yearning, He is our pursuit. Again, in light of God's invested interest in us, He spared not His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all. How can I not be interested in having fellowship with Him? How can I not grieve over sin in our lives? How can we not be sensitive toward Him? How can we not desire His Word, His day? There are God's people who cannot even set apart His day for Him. And they're like the young man who wrote his girlfriend. Oh, I'd do anything unless it rains. And that's the truth. How can we not be willing to stoop and surrender to Him? How can we not desire to go further in His cause and to draw closer to Him? How can I not live in the wonder and awe of God sparing not His own Son for me? So in light of such, what is our level of God interest? What is our degree of willingness to invest? Self. God's not commanding you to invest time. He's commanding you to invest self. You can't invest self without investing time. Well, I give God X amount of hours a week. That's not what's required. It's self. It's all. Again, in the Lord's service, there are those who do nothing. They do nothing. Claim to be saved, do absolutely nothing. And there are those who are willing to contribute to a certain point. Everyone has a stopping point. We need to ask ourselves where that is. And there are those who are committed, willing of themselves. And that needs to be each one of us. Commitment. Commitment to Him. Because of who He is. That's all the reason you need. Because of who He is. But in addition to who He is, what He has done for us ought to be a motivating factor in investing all that we have in Him without any reluctance. Without any reluctance whatsoever. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us in a verse of